Listening to TBR Radio Presents, the Dixie Heritage Hour, with your host, the Director of Dixie Heritage, Dr. Ed DeVries.
Last year, I had asked a very good friend of mine to be a guest on the show. That was Dr. Kent Hovind, the Director of Creation Science Evangelism. And specifically, we talked about a book that he had written, and that book was titled The Kennel. And it was a book exposing all of the corruption and just the downright evil in the criminal justice system. And that's a great book. It's available on his website, drdino.com. And if you're not familiar with it, if you did not hear the show last year, I suggest that you purchase that book and that you read it and that you give yourself an education on what's going on in our country. Specifically, what's going on in the prison system and why it's just a racket and why it needs to be corrected. And I'm just going to say it, President Trump's, actually it was his son-in-law, Jared Kushner's prison reform bill that the media made all the hullabaloo about it here recently, is not going to fix it. Doesn't come anywhere near addressing the real problem. But anyways, that's not the subject of our radio show today, but rather saying that by way of introduction simply because Dr. Hovind will once again be our guest. Today, I've received a lot of emails after Dr. Hovind was on the show. Bring him back. We want to find out what happened. We want to find out why he went to prison. We want to find out what happened during his trial. We want to find out what is he doing now. Dr. Hovind was a person who we got a lot of response and reaction when we had him on a guest here on our show. And so I could have had Dr. Hovind back at any time, and I was very slow in bringing him back. And for that, I apologize to you, our listeners. But Dr. Hovind is our guest today here on TBR Radio Presents, the Dixie Heritage Hour. And we begin the interview with him talking about, how he ended up going to the federal penitentiary in the first place. And so without any further ado, here is my dear friend, Dr. Kent Hovind. Dr. Kent Hovind on the phone. Some of our listeners, of course, Dr. Hovind will know that you've just recently come out of incarceration, but a lot of them won't know, or else they'll know that you went, but there was a lot of, let's just call it misinformation about why you were there. So why don't you start, I guess, by telling us a little bit about your credentials as a creation scientist and then how you wound up in the federal penitentiary.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. My name's Kent Hovind, probably the most hated man on the internet. I've been a Baptist preacher 45 years, taught high school science and mathematics 15 years, and I started a ministry in Pensacola, Florida called Creation Science Evangelism, where I defend the Bible as being scientifically accurate. I've done 133 debates against atheists and evolutionists all over the world. 10 years ago, the IRS came storming into our ministry with a SWAT team. I said, what is wrong here? They said, you're being arrested. I said, for what? They said, for structuring. I said, what on earth is that? If you look at the news, there have been about 500 businesses, small businesses, that have been shut down or had all their assets seized over that stupid structuring law. The government passed a couple laws years ago that said if you take money out of your bank in amounts less than $10,000, if you take out in amounts more than $10,000, the bank has to fill out a form. And this is called the structuring laws. So the drug dealers who did not want to be tracked, and the law was passed specifically to catch drug dealers, they would go in the morning and take out $9,500 and then go in the afternoon and take out $9,500. So Congress, in their great wisdom, passed another law that said if you take out less than $10,000 twice in one day, you have structured your transactions to evade the reporting requirement that the bank has. Well, we never did that. Once every 2 weeks, if we had it, my wife would withdraw $9,500 because we were building a lot of stuff at the ministry, and we had a lot of college kids working for us, and we didn't want to give them a credit card and a pickup truck. See them again 6 years later.
Right.
So we'd say, here's $3,000. Go to the bank or go to the store and buy shingles for this house or cabinets or whatever. So we dealt in cash for about a year and a half, and then we stopped back in 2002 and got credit cards and continued on our merry way building our ministry in Pensacola, Creation Science Evangelism. 5 years later, they come arrest me and my wife for structuring from 5 years ago. They were that desperate to find something to shut me up. When they came into our ministry with the SWAT team, they said specifically, get every DVD number 5 you can find. In my seminar, there are 7 DVDs. I talk about how to prove the earth is not billions of years old. I talk about what was the Garden of Eden like. Why did they live to be 900? Part 3 talks about dinosaurs, how they fit right into the Bible. They're part of the normal creation. They did not live millions of years ago. Part 4 is 2 hours on lies in the textbooks. And then part 5 is called the dangers of evolution. This theory, this evolution theory, is the foundation philosophy behind communism, Nazism, socialism, the New World Order, the pinky and the brain folks. I covered very thoroughly and very simply, where the kids get it, how dangerous evolution is. It's not just dumb, it's dangerous. And that's the one they wanted to get and shut me up over. So they arrested me, took us to trial, and my attorney's reading the law to the jury. He said, folks, Kent did not break any laws at all. The law says you have to do 2 transactions in 1 day that total over $10,000. And the U.S. attorney objected. I said, I object. My judge says, well, to what? Well, to what he's reading. Well, he's reading the law, ma'am. That's what we're being judged on here. Yeah, but I object. So the judge went back and actually changed the jury instructions, which changed the law. And she told the jury, if you find Kent took out less than $10,000, you have to find him guilty. Now, have you ever taken out less than $10,000 from your bank?
I think everybody has.
Okay, well, then you are just as guilty as I was. So they said, well, yeah, he's guilty. So then the judge said, Mr. Hovind, your crime is worse than rape. Normally, it's 0 to 6 months, especially since it's your first offense and you've never been to court for anything. But I'm enhancing this to 10 years. They gave me a 10-year sentence in federal prison for structuring, taking our own money out of our own bank to pay our own bills for a church ministry. Nothing to do with drugs. I turned 65 day before yesterday. I've never tasted alcohol. Certainly never had drugs except for NyQuil once in a while or an aspirin. So it's a bizarre case. Somebody did a 15-month study on my case and did a series of videos. It's on KentHovindIsInnocent.com. It is classic. He says, Kent, you didn't break a single law. The government broke 100 laws to put you in prison. And they did. Of course, they do that in the Soviet Union, too, and in communist China and North Korea. It's about the same thing. So anyway, I just got out 2 years ago, and God has been good. Lost everything. My wife divorced me, and lost everything in prison. And so we're starting over up in Lower Alabama, a little bitty town called Lenox. Someone gave us a lot of property, 140 acres up here, and we're building Dinosaur Adventureland, a place to teach how dinosaurs glorify God and they're part of the creation. It'll be a really fun place, science center, museum, theme park, all based on science and the Bible. So yeah, it's been an interesting road for 2 years, brother, but God's been really, really good. I love it.
So if I understand it correctly, your ex-wife, she was also sent to prison. She was, I guess, found guilty as a co-conspirator in your structuring scheme. If I understand it right, she was sentenced to hard labor.
The women's camps, I guess, I've heard, anyway, I've never been to one, they are worse than the men's, but really the federal prison camp system, the whole thing is a joke. It's like college dormitory. They just have a fence, not even a fence, just a sign, don't go past this sign. While I was in federal prison for 9 years, I led 800 men to the Lord, held Bible study 4 times a day in my room. I wrote 37 books. I earned 2 more doctor's degrees and another master's degree. So I wrote a book called The Kennel, which is a satire on the prison system. You can get it from our ministry. 855-BIG Dino is our phone number. But it's about the prison system. It is nothing but a money-making racket. I was shocked when I was in Yazoo City, Mississippi, the last prison camp I was in before they released me. I found out the ex-governor of Mississippi, conservative right-wing radical Haley Barbour, owns the property where the prison is. He has a 99-year lease to the federal government. They lease the property off of him, huge, 1,000 acres, I think. And his son, Haley Barbour Jr., is the chief federal judge in Jackson, Mississippi. So the more people they lock up and the longer the sentences they give them, the more income for the family. This ought to be double dipping in anybody's book with half a brain and one eye. So judges, policemen, sheriffs, congressmen, they all are allowed to own stock in our prison system. America has 4% of the world's population and 26% of the world's prisoners because it's a money-making racket. It is evil from top down. And I cover that in my book, The Kennel, for which they will probably look for an excuse to come arrest me again. That's okay. My job is to tell the truth, and if they don't like it, too bad.
I know that in your video 5, the one that you said that was confiscated, it's been a number of years since I've watched it. but I do remember you talking a bit about the evolution of government itself, and how even the tax scheme, if you will, of the United States is a product of bad evolution of government. Do you want to risk getting sent back by elaborating on that a little bit?
Oh, no problem. I'm not afraid of them. There are basically only two philosophies of government. There's only two religions in the world, Cain and Abel. Cain brought his fruit and his vegetables and said, God, look what I did for you. And God would not accept it. And most religions are trying to approach God and get him to accept them based upon what they do, rather than an innocent substitute, a sacrifice, a lamb. So the two philosophies of government are, number one, there is a creator of the world, and he tells us what's right and wrong. Second philosophy is, there is no creator. Man decides right and wrong. And I've asked evolutionists in debates all over the world, including the one 2 nights ago, I said, question, how do you tell right from wrong? If evolution is true, please tell me, how do you judge right from wrong? Is murder right or wrong? Is abortion right or wrong? Is sex with your dog right or wrong? Is anything wrong? And if so, tell me how you made this decision. Because if evolution is true, I don't see how there can be such a thing as right or wrong. And so the basic philosophy of government says there's a creator. The founders of this country put it in the document. They said, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. They're endowed by their creator with certain rights. So the question is very simple. Where do rights come from? Do you have the right to get married? Did that come from God, or do you have to get the government's permission for that? Do you have the right to drive on the highway, or do you have to get the government's permission for that? They would love to sell you their permission for $20 or $50, give you a permit. But exactly what is required? If the creation story is true, then the founders of this country were exactly right. Government should be limited, very limited. And the man is the boss. The people are supreme, not the government. Of course, the government would like to be supreme over the people. So it's a rabbit you can chase way down the hole if you want, brother. There's plenty on the internet about that. But the question is simple. Where do rights come from? And under the creation model, well, you belong to God, and rights come from him to you. So you don't have to get the government's permission for half the stuff we end up getting their permission for. It's none of their business. But that's another long trip. But I do cover that on Video 5. They did seize hundreds and hundreds of the copies we had of Video 5, including the master, but they did not get them all. So that is still circulating on the internet. Just type in The Dangers of Evolution by Kent Hovind, and it's posted all over the internet. It actually backfired on them, because now it's even out more on the internet. So our website, drdino.com, you can get my whole series. It's 18 hours, and I talk fast and use 7,000 pictures, visuals, PowerPoint, and it's $50 for the whole thing. It includes a debate I did against 3 atheists at once. Now, somebody took a little clip out of that debate, because one of the atheists, a real cocky fella, he said, okay, Hovind, where did God come from? And my little 2-minute answer has gone viral, with 55 million views on the internet. Where did God come from by Kent Hovind? Watch that if you want a good laugh. It really shut him up.
Essentially, you would think that this matter would have already been settled and even codified into the laws of this country, because did not the Declaration of Independence clearly state that we have the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that we have them because we're endowed by our Creator?
That is correct. However, you also have the right to make a contract. If you made a contract and said, hey, Kent, I'm going to pay you $50 an hour for the rest of my life, and you signed that contract, and then you don't fulfill the contract, I can take you to court and I would win, and you'd say, wait a minute, I've got rights. That's my money. Yes, it is your money, but you also have a right to contract. And so you made a contract. And so what the government has done, they've tricked us into making all sorts of contracts with them, secret contracts that we don't even know we've made, like your birth certificate, your marriage license, your driver's license, the Social Security number. All of those are secret, hidden contracts that they've got us into. And that's a battle somebody else will have to fight. But I understand it. We are on, I'm busy on the creation evolution side of this war. But yeah, there are plenty of people publishing stuff on why are we establishing these contracts with the government? Just don't establish the contract. So that's very interesting rabbit to chase down the hole.
If you love listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, then I know that you'll love reading the Barnes Review. The Barnes Review is one of my favorite magazines. I began reading the Barnes Review long before they became a sponsor here on the program. In the Barnes Review, you will read vignettes of man, from the prehistoric to the very recent, from forgotten races and civilizations to first-person accounts of World War II and the late Cold War. There's just not a more interesting magazine published today, nor a more significant and important subject than real history. So if you'll visit www.barnesreview.org, that's www.barnesreview.org, you can find out how you too can become a subscriber to the Barnes Review. You can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review by mail, or you can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review electronically in PDF editions. Or you can subscribe to receive both. That's what I do. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review. This is the Dixie Heritage Hour, so I have to move the subject of conversation into this direction at some point. Do you think that perhaps the Confederate Fathers, the Southern Fathers who formed the Confederacy, that they saw the bad evolution of the United States government, that it was evolving into something they knew that their fathers who, the Founding Fathers, had no intention for it to evolve into? Do you think that's part of the reason why they themselves exercised the right of secession?
Absolutely. Now, slavery, of course, is dead wrong, but that was not the issue for the Civil War. And there's nothing civil about any war. It's the war. It was really the war to determine if we're going to follow the Constitution and be under God, or follow the law, or follow a new corporation, United States. So many very interesting things happened because of that war in 1861. The South was exactly correct in their position that the federal government does not have the right to decide some of these things. It's none of their business. Slavery would have gone away on its own. It was taken care of in other countries like England without a war. But no, there were people pushing behind the scenes. And I'm from Illinois. And my ancestors came from Norway, but had they been here, they would have been in the Union. But the Union was dead wrong on that one. The South had the perfect right to secede. They were not right to do slavery. But are we going to invade every country that we disagree with how they handle things? Most of the Muslim countries have slavery right now. Millions and millions of slaves in Muslim countries. Why don't we go invade them and free their slaves? It's insane. The war was not about slavery. It was about states' rights, and the South was on the right side of that issue. So do you think then that 4-year period, 5-year period, even though the South lost, do you think that it slowed down the downward spiraling bad evolution of the United States government? I think what it did, it forced them to go into a different direction. When someone says, "Are you a U.S. citizen?" I say, "Well, I'm not exactly sure what you mean." There's quite a few different corporations with the name United States. Which United States are you talking about? Because when the South seceded and their congressman did not show up, they did not have a quorum. They couldn't even vote. And the Constitution says if there's an emergency and there's not enough people to even vote, you got to have 2/3 of the people there to even vote on anything. And so they didn't have 2/3. So Abe Lincoln took over by issuing executive orders. He issued Executive Order number 1 and ordered 75,000 troops to be gathered and invade the South. And ever since then, our country's been run by a president using executive orders. Donald Trump is the president of what exactly? He's the president of a corporation named United States. This is not the same as the original United States. There has not been a president of the real United States since Abe Lincoln. The office is vacant. That's another rabbit somebody can chase a long ways if they want to do some internet search, and it sounds so bizarre. But there's a corporation named United States that only represents the Philippines. That's it. There's another one for Guam, a totally separate corporation. They spell it differently. Capital U, capital S, all capital letters. Sometimes they put of United States of America. The way they spell it, but they're just corporations. They're not part of it. That's not the real U.S. government. And I spelled all that out in my video 5. Years and years ago, and that's probably why they threw me in prison, because I was exposing the simple truth. They are thieves.
The Bible says that the thief cometh not but for to steal, to kill, and to destroy.
What they do. They're really good at it.
There's a passage of Scripture, it's in Revelation. It says, "The kingdoms of this world shall become the kingdoms of our God and of his Christ," which means that the kingdoms of this world do not belong to Christ right now. They shall become his, but they don't belong to him right now.
Yeah.
And if you go back to when the devil had Jesus there on the mountain and he was tempting him, the Bible says he showed him all the nations of the world, and he says, just worship me and I'll give you all this. And Jesus told him that he wasn't going to worship him, but he never contested the devil's ownership of the nations of the world.
That is correct.
And so I think that even a lot of Christians in America do not want to wrap their head around the fact that if the nations of the world are right now in the possession of Satan, then that means that the United States of America and its government is in the possession of Satan.
Nope, nobody wants to think about that. You are correct.
Which would explain, for example, why the leaders of this country go out to California and worship an owl. Of course, we're talking about the Bohemian Grove, and I never intended for this interview to go that direction, but...
Well, a friend of mine in South Carolina used to work at the Bohemian Grove and has all kinds of video footage of inside stuff going on there. It is definitely where the super rich go to have their sex orgies and their parties and talk about they're going to pinky in the brain, you know, how are we going to rule the world? But see, I'm working for a different kingdom, the kingdom of heaven. And so I guess what they do is up to them. I just follow orders from my king, which he says, go win souls, and he'll take care of the rest.
So I know you had said that you had written several books while you were in prison. Tell us about some of the books that you were able to write.
Well, I wrote a very extensive book called What on Earth is About to Happen, for Heaven's Sake. It's about the future. The Bible says in 2 Peter chapter 3 that in the last days there would be scoffers who would be willingly ignorant of the creation and the flood and the coming judgment of God on the world. I had taught for decades on this topic of creation and the flood, but I kind of avoided the coming judgment. I believe for 40 years in what's called the pre-tribulation rapture. You know, Jesus is coming back any minute, which was started in 1830 by a 15-year-old girl in Scotland who had a dream from eating too much pizza late one night. And she said, oh, Jesus is coming back any minute. And they said, oh, wow. And that dream spread like crazy through the Schofield Bible and the Dake Study Bible, etc. And that's what I believed for 40 years. So while I was in prison, I didn't preach on the topic much on how the world's going to end, you know, Daniel and Revelation, because I just was not clear in my own mind. I knew what I had been taught, but I wasn't sure that that's what the Scripture said. So I just kind of avoided the subject. But now that I had plenty of time to research, I really poured myself into it and finally had to write a book. It was a dissertation for another doctor's degree. And the title is What on Earth is About to Happen, for Heaven's Sake. We are going to be here for the 7-year tribulation. We get raptured out after the tribulation when the sun and the moon go dark. So my book I wrote on that topic and my charts, they're all up on drdino.com. And I covered it several times on my YouTube channel, Kent Hovind Official. People want to go there, they can see it. And I'm doing that in a series of videotapes now called WOE, W-O-E, for What on Earth. What on Earth is About to Happen. So that book was probably the most critical one that God wanted me to write, and first of all, to get my theology straight myself, and then to write a book about it on end times. We get raptured out after the tribulation, before the wrath of God falls on the world. And nobody has refuted the book. I've had many people say, I don't like what this teaches, but I think you're right. They were all hoping to get out of here before tribulation comes. Well, why don't you tell that to the Chinese Christians and the Russian Christians and the North Korean Christians, you know? No, we're going to be, they're having persecution right now. Christians have had it for 2,000 years. Jesus said, in the world ye shall have tribulation. See, I was guilty of confusing tribulation with wrath. Tribulation is what the world does to us. And Jesus said, you're going to have that. Get ready. Now, wrath is what God does to the world. Now, we're not here for the wrath of God, but we are here for the tribulation. So that book has probably helped more people. If you watch my YouTube channel, Kent Hovind Official, you'll see a big chart right behind me as I teach. That goes along with that book, showing the very simple teaching of the Bible. You are here, if you're saved, you're going to be here for the tribulation. And while I was publishing sections of this from prison on the internet, I was getting all kinds of questions, and many people wrote in and said, Brother Hovind, when is this going to happen? What date would you give it? And I said, I don't know. Obviously, I couldn't put a date on it, but if I had to guess, and it would just be a guess, I would guess it's going to start in 2021, the 7-year period. And it's going to end in 2028 with the rapture, if anybody's left alive that's saved. So that's just my wild guess. I don't have a date, but that's I think, a reasonable estimate. So I think we've got a couple years, and then the economy is going to crash. We're going to see some real serious changes on planet Earth. And I think very few people are ready for it, especially American Christians, because we've been taught this. We're getting out of here any minute, you know, nothing to worry about. They've been taught that for so long that when it doesn't happen, they're going to get discouraged and fall away. Jesus said in Matthew 24, many are going to fall away because they're going to quit serving God. You watch, it's coming like a freight train.
Back in the 90s, it was actually the first book that I wrote, and I differentiated between the wrath of man and the wrath of God, and explained, just as you have, that for thousands of years, that God's people have endured the wrath of man. And I basically articulated a position that Marv Rosenthal, and our listeners wouldn't know who he was, but you probably do. He told me I was advocating what was called a yo-yo rapture. And that was that, at the Battle of Armageddon, that I had everybody coming up at the sound of the trumpet just to come right back down for the battle. I'm saying all that to say this, is that when I put that position out there, I made nothing but enemies in the, shall we say, fundamentalist Baptist ranks that I was running in. And knowing that you were running in the same circle for a number of years before you went to prison, have you received a similar reception?
Oh, absolutely. I understand what they're saying, but they're completely misunderstanding the position. That's why I have charts, and I'm a teacher. I put it out in visual form. Mm-hmm. Jesus comes down only as far as the clouds, calls up the Christians, and we are at the marriage supper of the Lamb for 1,040 days, about almost 3 years. During that time, the wrath of God falls on the earth. The wrath of God falls in the day of the Lord, and the whole key to the whole thing is 10 times in the Bible it says the sun and the moon are going to go dark. What's that?
Is one particular Sunday morning, I was in church, and I grew up at First Baptist Church of Hammond, Indiana. And so Jack Hyles was preaching, and he talked about how the wheat is gathered into the barn, and then the tares are burned. And he said the wheat being gathered into the barn was the rapture. And he said that the tares, being burned was the tribulation. And so afterwards, I waited in line, and I went into his office, and I asked him, I said, "Preacher," I said, "I just want to make sure I understand your sermon correctly." I said, that the tares being gathered into the barn was the rapture. He said, "Yes." I said, "And the destruction of those tares, that was the tribulation." He said, "Yes." I said, "Well, in the text, the tares are destroyed before the wheat is gathered into the barn." And he just kind of put his arm around my back and pushed me out of his office door and brought in the next person.
Jack Hyles.
That night he preached a message, and it was the 30 reasons why he believed in a pre-trib rapture.
Wow.
And
well, Jack Hyles,
the 30 it was like he was trying to tote water in a bucket full of holes, and that was when I began to question it.
Well, I was a brand new Christian, 1969, and my pastor gave me a whole bunch of sermons by Jack Hyles, and I have heard hundreds and hundreds. I love what he did for the world. He got me fired up for soul winning, and I almost went to Hyles Anderson College, but I'd already started at Midwestern Baptist College with Tom Malone, and I said, I'm going to finish what I started up here. But I love Hyles Anderson, love Jack Hyles, but he's wrong about he knows better now that he's up. But he's wrong about the pre-trib. But I was in his position all the way for 40 years, and I wish it was true.
Yep.
I don't look forward to tribulation, but it's coming, and Christians are so sound asleep on this topic. Right. I think and pray my book will help wake some people up.
So I'm asking you a crazy question with this one, but you said that you think that it may all begin in 2021. And so, do you think that Donald Trump will be ushering it in, or do you think that it'll get ushered in despite his? Of course, he's operating ignorant of all of it, I'm sure. But
well, I don't know. I don't know where Donald Trump stands on all of this, or God can use people or not use people. He can make Pharaoh do things he doesn't want to do. So we'll see. But see, Donald Trump is the president of a corporation that is currently handling the affairs of the United States. So I guess I don't worry about what he does. The reason I picked 2021 and 2028 as the dates, and they are just a wild guess on my part. Our calendar starts with the birth of Christ, and we know that was off by a couple of years. Probably really born in 4, 5, or 6 BC. So why are we starting with his birth? Why don't we start with his resurrection? That's really what started the New Testament, the death and resurrection, which would have been approximately the year 28 when Jesus was crucified and rose from the dead. So if our calendar started there, the year 2028 on this current Gregorian calendar would be actually the year 2000. And it seems like everything in the Bible happens right on time, right on a certain mark, And I think the dates from the Bible clearly add up to showing that the whole world is about 6,000 years old. It is not millions of years old. And it looks to me like God's working not only on a 7-day week, but a 7,000-year calendar for all of human history. And the 7th day, the last 1,000 years, the day of rest, called the millennium, Revelation chapter 20, that's probably going to start in 2028. So that's when I just my guess. We'll see. I think that's when the rapture is, 2028. We'll have to see.
Extra, read all about it.
If you're like me, and I'll bet you are because you're listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, you like to be on the cutting edge of honest news and accurate information. You like to hear about the latest financial trends and to know what's happening around the world and right here in the United States, the things that can directly impact you, your life, and the life of your family. And if you're like me, you do not rely on the mainstream media to obtain this information because, frankly, you know that you just can't trust them. Fortunately, there is an alternative news outlet with a long-established track record for honesty and integrity, and that is the American Free Press. AFP is the preeminent alternative, independent news source for honest, hard-working, truth-loving Americans. AFP is the antithesis of the controlled, lamestream media. AFP is employee-owned and has been so since its founding. Because of that, AFP never has and never will allow advertisers or special interests or big money to dictate what appears in the pages of the American Free Press newspaper. 26 times a year, the American Free Press newspaper can be delivered to your door, packed with the kind of uncensored news that I know you're going to appreciate. AFP covers the stories and tells the truth that the lamestream media is frankly scared to touch. And AFP offers real, on-the-scene reporting and commentary, the likes of which you will never see in the Washington Post, the New York Times, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, or just about any other lamestream news source that you can think of. That's right, there's only one national populist news weekly staffed by an unsurpassed team of veteran investigative journalists who will dare to rip the veil off of many of the major news stories that are being censored and suppressed by the big money controlled media monopoly. And that's the American Free Press. AFP publishes exciting, in-depth, uncensored news and information that's grassroots and patriotic, information that Americans need to know in order to combat the growing police state. AFP stands firmly against the New World Order and against those who are working to establish a global plantation under the rule of a powerful few. In short, AFP is your voice. If you have any doubt why they want to silence AFP, you must be relying on the lamestream media for your news, and folks, that's a big mistake. If you're ever dissatisfied with your subscription to the American Free Press, their guarantee is that you just drop them an email and they will gladly refund the unused portion of your subscription. So what are you waiting for? Visit www.americanfreepress.net. Once again, www.americanfreepress.net. And find out about the American Free Press. Do it today.
Extra, read all about it.
Well, I preached a message years ago, and it was on the Confederacy. And what inspired this was that I was asked the question somewhere that if you're such a strong advocate for the Confederacy, and if the Confederate leaders were such godly men, then why did God allow them to lose the war? And my answer to that was that Robert E. Lee, Jefferson Davis, Stonewall Jackson, these were godly men. But they were also, we talk about premillennialism, which is what we've been talking about here for the last few minutes. They were postmillennialists, specifically postmillennial Reconstructionists, which means that whereas in premillennialism, and I'm explaining this not for you, Dr. Hovind, but for some of our listeners, whereas in premillennialism, Jesus returns, and then there's the 1,000-year kingdom on earth, the millennial kingdom, the postmillennialists believe that Jesus comes after the end of that 1,000 years, that they have to essentially establish the kingdom, and then once they can do so, Jesus will come and sit upon the throne that they will build for him. And so all of the Confederate leadership appears to have been postmillennial Reconstructionists. And if you look at the early acts of the Confederate Congress, you get the impression that they were literally trying to establish the millennial kingdom on earth, hoping that they could establish God's kingdom on earth, and then, of course, that would force Jesus to return. Woodrow Wilson did the same thing with World War I. He was a Presbyterian and a postmillennial Reconstructionist. And so my argument would have been that had the South succeeded in what they were hoping to do, that it would have been awesome, but obviously it wasn't God's timing. You know, God will determine when that kingdom will be established, and he doesn't need our help to establish it.
Well, that's another very interesting twist on things. I guess I haven't studied that topic much. I didn't realize those three guys were post-millennialists. I'll have to get into more of that. They were in the right, the South was, as far as the issue of, the federal government. And the founders of this country had a philosophy that we should have a very, very tiny federal government, limited to a little bitty square called Washington, D.C., 10 miles by 10 miles. And keeping that government in that little box has proven to be impossible. Government always wants, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So they were trying to uphold the founding fathers' dream of a small, limited government and freedom for people. The people are the boss, not the government. So, that's my DVD number 5. Really irritated them because I simply exposed in my simple 4th grade level style. Here's what it's supposed to be, and here's what it is, and who are these people exactly? And there are a lot of people who know how to shut them down. It's not a battle I care to fight. I'm busy on the creation evolution front, and now I've added the third leg of the end times with my book, What on Earth's About to Happen, and my video series I'm doing called Whoa, W-O-E. The first 6 tapes are done. They can get them at drdino.com or call 855-BIG-DINO. But I just want to help, brother, so I'll have to do some more research on that. So they gave up. Well, of course, they were outgunned and outmanned and outspent, but they sure, with all the odds against them, did an amazing job of holding that war on for 4 years.
Well, one thing that I've noticed is that the South really did not lose any battles until after the death of Stonewall Jackson. And sometimes I've wondered if Stonewall Jackson was not such a godly man that perhaps the Lord had to take him home before he could allow the South to lose the war.
Interesting. He was quite a fella. He was amazing. A lot of the Southern generals were. But again, slavery is wrong. It's evil, it's wicked, and God's against it. And they were wrong on that issue, but that's not really what they were fighting for. Abe Lincoln made that an issue much later.
Right.
But that wasn't the purpose. You all know all that stuff, but okay.
So, all the monuments are coming down now. And it's not just Confederate monuments, although that's what I tend to talk about the most in my newsletter. But it's not just Confederate monuments. For example, on Monday, I was up in Baltimore, and there's a monument there to Francis Scott Key, the author of the Star-Spangled Banner. And his monument was defaced on Monday, which was Martin Luther King Day. And there was a group of protesters who basically was out there in freezing cold weather, declaring that Francis Scott Key was a racist. Chief Justice Taney, who figures very prominently in the history of Maryland, his monument came down in Baltimore recently. I read recently that the monument to George Washington in the vestry of Christ Church in Alexandria, Virginia, has been removed because Washington was a slaveholder. So it's not just Confederate monuments that are coming down, but it's also monuments of several men who've been prominent in our country's history. Christopher Columbus's monument, other men. Do you think that the attacks against all of these monuments is an attack against the Christian culture, the Christian history of our country itself?
Oh, absolutely. This is Karl Marx, Communism 101. You have to destroy the people's memory of what it used to be. You don't want them to have any roots, especially roots that go back to Christian beliefs, because then they're going to start thinking they've got rights that come from the Creator. It goes back to how we started this conversation. There's 2 philosophies of government. If there's a Creator, then he decides right from wrong. If there is no Creator, then God decides right from wrong. Then government decides right from wrong. So people like me are a great threat to the New World Order pinky in the brain folks who want to control the world, because I teach that, hey, we got a Bible and God told us what our rights are, and he decides right from wrong, not government. Government's supposed to serve the people, like our founding fathers said, and that's not what they want. They want you to serve them. So it's a real philosophical battle. The Civil War is just one aspect of it, showing that, hey, there's an undercurrent here of who decides right from wrong and how do they decide. And it goes right back to creation versus evolution. There's only two options. There is a creator or there isn't. Nobody's figured out a third option. So if there's a creator, then obviously he would decide right from wrong, and he's the boss. He makes the rules. But there are those who don't want God's rules, so they tell everybody there is no creator. And so that's where the battle line is. And I'm up on the front line of it, and boy, they don't like me.
You know, we talk about the return of Christ, and we talk about the tribulation. And of course, you know, for that to happen, wicked men waxing worse and worse. But we could also make the argument that Jesus has tarried his coming for 2,000 years, and he could tarry it for 2,000 more.
Oh, sure. I don't know. I don't know when he's coming.
Right. And so, is it possible to turn it around? In other words, obviously our government has evolved into this creature, whatever we want to call it, but our country had evolved into something that was, you know, tyrannical, and the founding fathers managed to separate themselves from it and form the country that we have now. And so is it possible to turn the ship around again?
Yes. I don't think it's going to happen, but it's always possible. If you read through the book of Judges, you know, the people, or even Joshua, the people went wicked, and God would send them a judge, and sometimes they would follow the judge, and sometimes they wouldn't. And the nation of Israel is a microcosm of the whole world. They, you know, when they did right, God blessed them, and when they did wrong, God punished them. And so what we need is a grassroots revival in America. I don't see it happening. I wish it would. What we need is more soul winners, people leading people to Christ. And see, Jesus was born and raised and died under Roman authority. He did not spend 5 minutes trying to change the Roman Empire. He just went after people, and they can't stop that. Just one by one, win people to the Lord, get them discipled to go do the same thing. And so that's Jesus' method, and that's hopefully my goal is to follow what he did, and just go after people, get them saved, get strength in their faith, and then go get some more. So I'm not trying to change the government. You know, along the way, I try to expose the truth, and if that bothers them, I'm sorry. See, all Gideon had for weapons in the book of Judges was shine the light and make a lot of noise, and the enemy fought each other. I think that's the simplest battle plan we've got today, is the Christian should be just simply shine the light and make a lot of noise. Tell the truth, here's what's going on, and make a lot of noise about it, but I'm not going to get involved in fighting anybody.
From what you've said, it reminds me of a sermon that was preached years ago by a mutual friend of ours, Dr. Greg Dixon. And he said that it is not coincidental that the Great Awakening occurred right before the Declaration of Independence and the Revolutionary War. And that
Right.
the American Revolution was actually the fruit of the Great Awakening and of our founding fathers' conversions to Christianity.
Exactly correct.
And so, so what you're saying then is that if there could be a revival, then a spiritual revival, a religious revival, then potentially there could be a political revolution or political revival as well.
Yeah, there would be. If we had enough politicians that, you know, knew the truth and were willing to stand up. See, the problem with politicians is they're worried about getting elected rather than worried about pleasing God. If we get some that just say, oh, what does God care? What does God think? You know, all through history, God has called, you know, a couple of men to say, stand up, like David. Stand up for what's right. Go against Goliath. So that's got to be scary to go against a guy 10 feet tall, but sometimes you just do that, you know. Winston Churchill told the people in England, he said, look, I can't show you we're going to win, but we've got to fight. It's better to die as free men fighting than to live as slaves. And so, yeah, I think we should certainly strive for revival, and that may lead to a political revolution. I don't know. I hope it does, but I'm not part of that. I don't think I would have thrown the tea in the harbor, but I would have handed the guys a sandwich as they walked by. Good job, guys. I got a different battle to fight. You know, okay?
Videos have been very popular in what I'll call Patriot Circles. And each of those Patriot Circles has its own section of the war, if you will, that they're fighting. And these groups are anything from united with one another, which I think is probably part of the reason why the government is successfully moving in the direction that it is, because all of the various factions that would oppose its downward movement can't even unify amongst themselves. I'll bet you're constantly trying to get sucked into all of these different causes and all of these different battles, are you not?
Oh yeah, and I don't join. I'm not a member of anything. I just gonna serve God. I'm plowing my row as straight as I can, and I'm thrilled other people are plowing their row. But no, I'm not joining anybody's team. Like I said, I'll hand them a sandwich if they're headed to throw the tea in the harbor, and I'll support them. And I recommend all kinds of other groups. But no, I'm not a member of anything.
There was once a Christian culture in this country, and I do not know that culture still exists today. There are vestiges of it, but I don't know that I would refer to the United States as a distinctly Christian nation or as a distinctly Christian culture. How and why do you think that the government of this country started wandering from that culture?
Well, the founders of this country back in the 1700s said this type of government, which is a republic, a constitutional republic, it is not a democracy. Democracies are dangerous. The majority can vote to kill the minority. So, no, we're not a democracy. But the founders said this type of government, a republic, is designed for a godly people. It will not work with anything else. This is designed for people who want to try to do right. See, I don't mind going into a city in Montana where I know probably everybody has a gun, because most of them are well behaved, and even they may not be Christian, but they don't carry their gun to hurt anybody, just to protect themselves. A lot of the animals that eat grass have horns. You don't need horns to eat grass. You need horns to explain to the lion, stay off my back. Okay?
Yeah.
I think everybody should be armed. And if somebody misbehaves, I mean, if a thief walks into a McDonald's to rob the place, there ought to be 10 guys there that shoot him. Pull out their gun. So yeah, I think, and that's what our founders said, the right to bear arms. The Second Amendment drives the liberals crazy, because that is one of the biggest obstacles to them taking over. One of the first things they do in every country when the communist type or dictator types take over is disarm the people. I go in my video number 5, the one they hated, I went through country after country and showed examples, like when they took over Turkey and Armenia, how they disarmed the people, and then over 1 million innocent Christians were slaughtered. They couldn't defend themselves. Hitler, first thing he did, disarm all the Jews. Jews are not allowed to own weapons. Well, then it's easy to round them up. So gun control is one of the central pillars that dictatorships stand on. They have to have complete arms control, which is why they're trying to give everybody a felony like they did to me. So I can't have a gun now until I get my felony overturned. So there's 30 million felons in America. 1 out of 10. 30 million. By far the largest in the world.
Wow, I never realized that.
Well, the goal, one of the many goals, is to make money for the people who own the prison. They got another customer now. And plus the commissary. It's unbelievable. Everything on the commissary, when you go to buy a bag of potato chips, is 30% higher than on the street, because who owns that commissary? It's some congressman or senator, representative, or judge who put you there, who's going to make profit again. So they got their paycheck for doing their job as judge. Now they get another paycheck on their investments in the prison system. It's evil from the top down. Get my book, The Kennel, for more on that. So, yeah, it's a money-making racket. But another goal of all this is to take away guns. And so, yeah, it's a sad state of affairs in America. And the only thing I see as a solution is revival at the spiritual level. Get people converted. See, when I was growing up, I wanted to please my dad. He was a great dad. He was a Marines in World War II, the only survivor of his platoon, and he was just a fabulous father, and I wanted to please him. So when I was in high school and the other kids were going off doing stupid things, drinking or drag racing or having sex with girls and stuff, I didn't do any of that because I knew my dad would not be pleased. So I had an internal control mechanism built in. I think Christians, if they want to please God, they have an internal control mechanism, and they're very easy to govern. You don't need but one policeman per 10,000 when they're all trying to do right themselves. But when everybody's trying to do wrong and they don't have that internal control, well, now you need a huge police force. And those people who want their one world government, new world order, They want a giant police force to enforce their stupid laws, and so they want people to be wicked. That's why they started the drug war. If I was president, I would legalize all drugs, and I would stop all welfare. You want to take drugs, you want to get drunk, go for it. Now, you want to drive on the street? Oh, no, that's a different story. Now, there we might have to put a limit, because now you're endangering me. But if you want to take drugs or to get drunk, fine. Now, if you want me to pay for your groceries or pay when you get sick, oh, no, that's not right. That's why you have to do both. Legalize all drugs and stop all welfare. I answered that question on a video one time. It went kind of viral on the internet about this topic. Yeah, we need to legalize all drugs and stop the welfare. This whole thing about the health care is so stupid. Obamacare, What they want to say is, I want to take drugs, I want to drink, I want to carouse around, and if I get sick, you've got to help me pay for it. 70% of all health expenses, go to any hospital and ask any doctor, what percentage of the money spent on sickness is from a problem the people did to themselves? Poor diet, drinking, alcohol, whatever, Oh, it's about 70 to 80% of all medical expenses in America right now come from problems that are self-induced. Okay, well, if you want to take drugs or drink, you just go for it, but I don't want to pay for it when you get sick. That's the problem. I mean, when I get sick, I have to pay for it myself, so therefore I take care of my health. I watch what I eat, I take my vitamins. I've got to live in this body. It's not your job to pay for it if I get sick. It's my job. So, yeah, that's ties back into the general philosophy, though, of what is government for? Is the government to provide welfare? No, it's just the only purpose is to protect us from foreign invaders and to punish evildoers within the boundaries of this country. It's not the government's job to get anything else. We should have an army to protect us from an outside invader and a system of punishing those who are dangerous internally, and that's it. End of story. I would cut the federal government and the state government down to about 5% of its current size in just a few minutes. What are we involved in welfare? Why is the federal government involved in education at all? I completely shut down the Federal Department of Education. There's no reason for it at all.
The North Carolina Heritage Political Action Committee was organized by concerned citizens of North Carolina in 2015 in response to the increased attacks on North Carolina's history and heritage. The North Carolina Heritage Pact supports state and local candidates for public office who pledge and show their support for the protection of Confederate memorials and the preservation of all of North Carolina's history. We all know that Confederate memorials and symbols are the easy targets, and that the end game of our leftist enemies is to erase and rewrite all of history, from the colonies to the War on Terror. If we fight them for our state's rich Confederate history and heritage, we may be able to stop them from their mission of total destruction. Join the North Carolina Heritage Pact now by visiting ncheritagepac.org. Once again, that is www.ncheritagepac.org. And help us on the front lines of North Carolina politics. The mission statement of North Carolina Heritage Pact is that the North Carolina Heritage Pact was created with the purpose of supporting diverse efforts to defend and preserve the heritage, traditions, monuments, cemeteries, flags, emblems, and other legacies of North Carolina history against those efforts to remove, deface, legislate against, alter, and otherwise corrupt or pervert their meaning, history, presentation, and standing in our state. Once again, www.ncheritagepac.org.
The Bible says there's one lawgiver, and that is God.
Correct.
And you've said that, you either believe in creation and that there's a creator, and if there's a creator, then it's God who determines right and wrong, and if not, then government does. And so believing in creation and believing that God is the creator, that God is the lawgiver, because he not only created the planet and he not only created the people, but he would be the creator of government itself. He would have been the creator of the law, the lawgiver. If God created government to enforce his law, and I know you believe this, Romans 13 teaches this.
Right.
And so God didn't create government to establish law, but rather to enforce or uphold the law that he had already given.
Basically gave us 10 laws. Jesus managed to compress those 10 laws into just 2. And yet, if you look at the federal code today, if you look at the U.S. code, it's a lot thicker than the Bible. Just Title 26 of the U.S. code alone, which of course is the Internal Revenue Service code, is way thicker than the Bible. And so that which God had created to enforce the very simple law that he had given has instead created a volume of what it dares to call law that is ordinance upon ordinance upon ordinance that is far more than God had ever established. I mean, how did that happen?
Well, it always creeps in like that. Once you get a few rules, then why not more, because it becomes a money-making racket. The more rules you have, the more people have to enforce them, which means you got more policemen getting a job, more congressmen, senators, more lawyers, more judges. The whole system grows and swells on its own. It becomes fatter and fatter. They need more laws to provide more income for them. The Bible says the love of money is the root of all evil. So it's just that you can always trace it back to the dollar, which is why I mentioned about the prison camps being owned by judges, the property, or by congressmen, people passing the laws. They own the property where the lawbreakers go. Hello? Anybody see a problem with this? It's a royal...
One thing that I've always noticed is that when you go to court, and it doesn't matter what it is, it could be a serious criminal offense, it could be a traffic ticket, that even when the charges are dismissed, even when the ticket is dismissed, even when the person has been exonerated, and everything goes away, except for the court costs. And what a lot of people do not realize is that in most states, the court costs go directly into the judge's retirement fund.
That's correct.
And so you're right, it is a racket.
And I'm going to cut it there. That's all the time we have for this week's TBR Radio Presents, the Dixie Heritage Hour. Dr. Hovind and I probably could have talked for another half an hour or so. And so what I'm probably going to do, and I'm not going to promise you a time or a date, but at some point we will have Dr. Hovind back yet again. And we'll talk some more, and I know you'll look forward to hearing him when he comes. But until then, I want to thank you for being our guest here on this week's TBR Radio Presents, the Dixie Heritage Hour. And I want to encourage you to go to our website, www.dixieheritage.net. When you're there, you'll be able to sign up for our free weekly Dixie Heritage newsletter. Just this week, I got an email. And it amazes me, the people who watch the Dixie Heritage, or rather listen to the Dixie Heritage Hour on TBR Radio, and who watch on our YouTube feed, and also who are just reading the newsletter. I received an email recently from a person who the only way really to describe them would be British nobility. They're not quite in the royal family, but they are in the nobility there. If you understand how the class structure works in Great Britain, you'll know what I'm talking about. And if not, then you probably wouldn't be impressed anyways. But some British nobility that has been reading the newsletter, and I can tell they read the newsletter actively based on some of the comments that they made to me and some of the suggestions that they made. And apparently they take considerable interest in what's happening here in the United States with monument removals and so forth. So it just always amazes me, but I'd love to send you that newsletter absolutely free of charge each and every week. No cost, no obligation. All you have to do is just give us your email address on the little sign-up form there on the www.dixieheritage.net website. And when you sign up for that newsletter, I will also send you, no obligation, free of charge, a copy of my book, The Truth About the Confederate Battle Flag. I'd also like to encourage you to go to our guest website, drdino.com. There's a lot of great material there. Dr. Hovind, of course, has written several books, all of them excellent materials. Dr. Hovind and I talked about Bible prophecy a little bit in today's broadcast. If you'll go to his website, of course, there will be his book on Bible prophecy that he talked about. There's also a book that I've written called Bible Teaching About the Rapture. And it's the first book that I ever wrote. And I'll tell you what, if you reach out to me through the Dixie Heritage website, you use the contact form, you send me an email, what I will do is you tell me you're interested in that book. I'll tell you how to shoot some PayPal over there to me. And for $5, including the cost of shipping and handling, I'll send you a copy of the book, Bible Teaching About the Rapture. But we are out of time now this week, so what I'd like to do is I would like to encourage you to tune back in again next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Until then, from all of us here at TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour, God bless.